Well, Charlie, I really do appreciate you making this time. I know you, as you said, you're the ultimate extrovert. You're like, let's go hard. Let's keep going. They also say that you really should not write a book unless you are happy to talk about that book a lot for a long time.
And market it. Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I actually think that when people ask about, the decision to write a book, I mean, I guess people could sort of self-publish, but I really think that ultimately the way the publishing works now is people get books who publishers think can sell them and who are
Correct.
willing to go out and talk to a lot of people about them. And that is, how good of a writer you are is probably secondary to that. So
Yes.
it's sort of the nature of the industry now. I hope I'm a
Right.
little bit
Which,
both.
right. Which, of course, like as a fellow author, I've self-published and published. And when people ask me like, oh, I think there's this tiny moment of micro validity when people are like, oh, did you self-publish? Or honestly, I think publishers do very, very little for you. If you're going to do it again, my advice would be self-publish because, you clearly have a platform and you clearly can talk to a lot of people about the stuff. But that's not what we're here to talk about. That's just
I think it's interesting. So first of all, I was approached by my publisher, and it's actually a very indicative story of how I interact with the community. My publisher, this guy Phil Marino from Wiley, who's an absolutely terrific guy, also lives in Brooklyn, and he had a startup idea years ago and thought about pursuing it, found one of my community events, followed me, poked around the ecosystem thanks to my newsletter and whatnot, and realized this is in fact really hard and maybe this idea is not the right idea. And so we went back to publishing or decided not to leave, but glommed onto my writing through that exploration of entrepreneurship.
Yes.
And it's not surprising to me that that's how I wound up doing a book, is that somebody in New York who was exploring entrepreneurship found me because I try and make myself findable to entrepreneurs.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. And you're a great writer, by the way. I've enjoyed your writing a great deal.
That.
Well, so we're already before the cart and the horse, but we're in it. I still want to officially welcome you to the Conversation Factory, and I'm grateful for the time. And congratulations on the book. Great job. It's a great book. I love the story of how the book kind of found you, or you found the publisher through community. And you do a lot of work around community. And clearly the community is supporting you as you roll the book out. I mean, I was at an event of yours on Tuesday. I didn't even know you were, when I signed up for it, I thought the topic was interesting. And then I was like, oh, Charlie's talking at it. Like, of course. So it seems like you're everywhere, which is great.
And Kat was super cool for putting the QR code up, the whole panel.
Yeah.
And, that was really, really terrific of them. And I really enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah, it was a great, and there's some things I want to peel the onion back on. But first of all, like, what's the one message from the book that you feel like people might miss? Because like a book's it's a big book. Some people don't even get past the free sample. And some people might read the book, but miss the core message.
So my biggest worry is that the book is discouraging. And I don't want it to be discouraging. And, I wrote a post today about two sort of mildly comparable startups. And one that I had backed in the micromobility space, scooters and whatnot. And there's another company that recently got profiled in Inc. that's building, I don't know if you call it a scooter, a company called Infinite Machine. It's kind of scooter-like. And this recent
These are the ones that are like the sexy Tesla Cybertruck baby. I read the essay, but I've seen the scooters too. They're amazing looking.
Yeah, they
scooters.
Look like they're right out of, the RoboCop should be riding them, right? And and it looks like they're very futuristic. And that company got $14 million of funding, and the company that I backed a few years ago did not. And that company struggled to raise. And also, one of the sort of variables in there was a Hispanic immigrant founder. And it's just very easy to put those two companies up there and to say, well, we all know what's going on here, right? And there are lots of things you hear in the venture ecosystem about who gets funded and who doesn't.
Yeah.
And in this post today, I tried to peel back the layers of like what I actually think is going on. And some of it, when I sort of got accused of throwing it back on the founder, is just that the person across the table from you is trying to figure out whether you're going to build a decacorn and IPO for $10 billion.
Yeah.
And the people who do well at doing that think that's what's gonna happen from the beginning, and they're not afraid to say it, and they're even
Right.
a little bit pushy about it, right? And not everybody who has varied backgrounds is comfortable like being that person in the meeting.
Right.
And so I sort of wrote about this, and one of the first comments I got back was from a female entrepreneur who was like, "This was hard to read, but I'm glad I wrote it, and I realize I have some work to do." Great. That is exactly what I'm going for, right?
Yeah.
Because it isn't an easy read, and some of it does kind of throw it back on you and say, "Hey, did you actually put the fantasy cash flow hockey stick in your deck? Because you might think it's BS, but
Yeah.
signaling the intention to build a venture-sized company is a prerequisite for getting venture dollars. And if you go back and you're like, actually, I didn't say it because I wasn't comfortable saying it. That's hard, but
Yeah.
hopefully, ultimately, it's helpful.
Yeah. Well, look, I think you're trying to thread a difficult needle. I read the essay. I thought it was very interesting. And when I pair it with the conversation you had with our friend Lauren Pearl about bias in the room, I think you were really trying to chase in that essay where the bias exists and where in the system a VC can really have an impact. Because saying that you should change your approach and how you pitch and speak to risk more, or go for broke and swing for the fences, is very different than saying, well, maybe VCs should be hiring more diverse people to be on their staff so that in 5 years, those people are better networked and understand the game better, so that when they have an idea and they want to pitch it, they're not just coming to an event trying to suck up whatever insight they can from writing and plug into the community. That way they're already in the community. And I think upstream versus downstream solutions, that's what I heard you saying. But I also understand that you're walking a delicate line, because Lauren and I talked about it. She's like, yeah, I didn't want him to be right. This is hard. I don't think you're blaming the founder, but
No,
what you're saying is, in the
I
room,
know.
the only things you can do are the things in the room. And saying this is really like, my whole chest like gets tingly with this, because like saying you can't complain about it, about inequality in the room, that's too late. You're saying the VC's job is to start now with building a more diverse ecosystem now. So I want to pivot. I know I'm gonna have to work very hard. I don't know if you know what your conversational style is. You swing for the fences and you go for broke. So I'm gonna just have to break in occasionally and try to rein you in. I hope you're okay with that, Charlie.
Yeah, no.
Okay,
Feel
good,
free.
good.
That's what I do to other people on panels. I totally get it.
So my second book is about designing conversations, which I think we are all designers of, shapers of, architectures of conversations. And I've heard you use the term conversational judo to describe. You talked about this in the panel on Tuesday. You talked about this in your conversation with Lauren. The judo approach is to you're getting questions you don't want to answer, or the conversation's going in a direction where you don't want it to go, and finding a way to elegantly, for the people listening, they can't see where my finger's going, but to elegantly pivot, to swerve, to say yes and also. I think the inner resources to do that are non-trivial. You can plan, but I'm just wondering how you coach founders to make sure they find the inner and the outer resources to understand what kind of judo they need to apply to get the conversation where they need to go, get it. Now I can't finish that as an English sentence, but I'm going to pause and let that filter through your brainstem.
So I got asked a version of this question by somebody in a class that I spoke to who it resonated that they come from a particular background where prognosticating this big ridiculous future was not something that came easily to them.
Sure.
And they said, how do you coach a founder around that? And I said, you can't tell them to feel differently. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
What you can do is objectively say, you have a sales challenge. The person across the table from you wants to buy a ticket to a very large outcome. What are the things that you need to tell them to convince them that that's what you're selling? So take how you feel out of this, right? It's not about how you feel. It's how good you are at selling that particular product. And that's something that we can objectively talk about and put your feelings aside related to it. And so that's really where the coaching comes in, is saying things like, if you pitch a venture capitalist, they know that the downside, you need to figure out the upside around it, or that, yes, it is true that they're going to ask a bunch of downside related questions, but like a good politician, you don't have to answer them.
Right. And just reminding them that they have a choice, like their hand is on the steering wheel too. And I think you're pointing to something that when I think about negotiation theory, I always like to talk about I went on maybe the best intellectual vacation of my life. I went to Harvard for their negotiation intensive for a week. And it's just like, losing against some of the top lawyers in the country while, taking copious notes. And then like by the end, you realize like you need to ask more questions and you need to think about what matters to them. Often I think when we're selling to someone else, and especially because founders are so passionate and about what they believe and the vision that they want to create, it can come from I believe, I want, this is how I got here. And I think very often people like to explain their ideas about how they got there. And that's less important, certainly to the person across the table, because they want to know, where are you going to take this? What's going to happen next? What are you going to do with this money? And I think that's the sort of the me and what I want and what I need and what I've been thinking versus the get out of my chair, go to the other side of the table and go sit in their chair and say, well, what do they want to hear? What kind of things are music to their ears? So that sounds like you're advocating for the get out of my head approach and get into their head approach.
Yeah. And you know what also happens sometimes too, that how I got there thing, sometimes it's your own insecurity that goes into that because you're trying to prove that you belong in the room. The venture capitalist has already said that you belong in the room because they invited you.
Yeah, for sure.
They're not there for free interview practice.
Right. Well, so I think I drew this diagram, which I can't really show you because it's a tiny squiggle, when you were talking about how a lot of people leave the room without really knowing how they did. And I think about conversations as an arc. And if we can architect them, it means that we got to think about the arc, which is like the beginning, the middle, and the end. And you talked about somebody who gets into the room and says, like any good teacher, presenter, learning development instructor, say, hey, this is the room that I thought I came in. I think we need to talk about this, this, and this. Like, do you guys agree? Is that what you're all here to talk about? Cool. Like, let's talk about it. And then check in as we get towards the end and say, so we needed to understand this, demonstrate this, and establish that. Like, how are we doing? Let's temperature check. How do we do? And then say, do you have any questions? And how come we're not a yes? Like, you really, there's a very strong beginning, middle, and end that you want founders to really be holding in. And a lot of the founders I've coached feel like they get lost in the swim because you guys can ask them questions right off the bat and they can lose control of that arc. So how can a person keep their hand on the wheel and guide the conversation through where they want to get it to?
Let me tell you, I am the world's worst passenger. And
Yeah.
from literally, and I think it comes from my dad was an absolute terrible driver. And as soon as he taught me how to drive, that was the last time I ever got in the car with him driving. And I'm not happy with anybody else driving, and I can't sit there. And I am the same in a
Mm,
pitch meet. And so as much as you try and keep your hands on the wheel, I'm grabbing it and trying to take over. So you really have to hold on for dear life in a
yeah.
meeting with me. And it is not easy. And don't think your deck is going to be the structure of the meeting, because I'm going to
Mm,
get past it, or you're not even going to have a chance to put the deck up, and we're just going to start talking about stuff. And so,
yeah.
um, yeah, you need to control the room, but also provide enough flexibility so that you can answer. If I'm like, listen, I really want to know if you do X, Y, and Z. If you say we'll get to that, well, I'm
Mm,
I'm all I'm thinking about is this thing, right? Whatever you
right.
say after that, I'm half paying attention until I get the answer to my one question, right?
Right.
So the
Hmm.
idea that I'm going to give you a podcast answer that's going to explain the whole thing, and I'm better at criticizing it than I am probably
Right.
actually doing it. But I think what's really important is to help the investor understand how to understand.
Yeah.
So, for example, one of the examples I use in the book is a nutrition bar company, and there's a lot of bars out there. Some of them clearly become very successful. Like there's a lot of big exits in the bar space.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert consumer investor, CPG, and so when I was critiquing somebody's pitch around this, what I said to them was like, "You need to explain to me why people win in this space." And here's a suggestion. It feels like in the food space there are waves. There was the Atkins thing, and then everything has protein, and then there's some other thing. If you tell me, listen, there's a bunch of waves, and this current wave is hormone health in this case, and every wave produces a bar winner, and here's my three or four
Hmm.
examples of one of those things, then I'm like halfway there. Oh, I see. Yeah, I could kind of buy the hormone health as the current wave. And now I'm bought in that there's probably going to be a bar winner in this
Mm,
space. So all you have to do is convince me, well, it might as well be us,
right.
right? Which is much better than trying to convince me from scratch, well, how you're going to do this whole thing and get the
Sure.
marketing out there. And
Have you ever read the Challenger sale?
I
It's one
have
of
read
these.
of it. I am a really bad, you can do this with my book. It's fine as long as you make it. I buy a lot of books on Kindle and then read like a third of them.
Sure. 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 Which third? The last? Are you? Some people are like the last page readers, but this isn't a novel. It's not like the big
Right.
reveals on the last. It's some books are meant to be I think paged through, but yours has stories that I think are short enough that somebody could absorb them. The, the Challenger Sale is a great audiobook, and they talk about this teach, tailor, and take control, the 3 T's. That the salespeople who in any market can take control of the conversation, tailor the message to the person they're talking to. I like actually know the thesis of the person, and the teaching them something is kind of what you're talking about. Is leading with a hook that gives them something that surprises them,
Let me tell you about this space.
getting their attention. Let me tell you, like, here's what I think you should know, and that's really putting the Minto pyramid, like putting your conclusion way up front, because it sounds like if you've got a Charlie O'Donnell in the room, that's like a land war in Asia or going up against a Sicilian when death is on the line. Like, you're not going to be able to take control because they are going to have their own agenda and may want to get to page 5. And if you say, I'll get to that, if I heard you right, we're losing you if I say I'm going to
Right.
get to that. Yeah.
My 4-year-old took control of a room yesterday by telling me that sharks have no bones.
That's
And I'm
strong.
like, I've seen shark jaws. You can't be right about this. And in fact,
It's all cartilage.
it's all cartilage. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's my wife and I went down a rabbit hole of like, sometimes there's calcification that comes from the water, but like ultimately it's not
Mhm.
under the strict biological definition of bone.
Yeah.
But let me tell you, she
She's up to
commanded
date.
the room.
Yeah.
She commanded the room. We were paying attention.
Yeah.
Sharks have no bone.
Assertion, which really goes back to our early point about being able to say whatever you want to say with confidence, which is much easier if you've got some runway, because you're not going to go hungry if this pitch goes wrong.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So you're a coach. You know, I feel like you're less of, maybe you're sort of in this transition period from, you still talk about VC, but I have a feeling like when I look at your
Which
emails,
VCs now?
yeah, you coach VCs, right? Exactly. Which is different than the kind of coaching I do, which is coaching founders and executives. I'm curious, from your perspective, understanding founders and the company life cycle, where, well, I want to understand what your coaching philosophy is. Like, how do you think about coaching and how do you define coaching? But I'm also curious for the kind of people who are reading your book, which is for founders, is where in their life cycle do you think they benefit most from coaching, and what kind of coaching at what stage?
I read a really great coaching article. I need to find the author, and I feel like it was a New Yorker article about a surgeon. And a surgeon, it turns out that surgeons peak at 40, roughly, because you have accumulated enough hours
Wow.
under the knife. But then at 40, your eyesight and hand steadiness starts to decline, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 40 is sort of the peak of surgery, as opposed to like baseball is year 27. And the surgeon was like, read that somewhere and was not happy about the idea that he had peaked. And so he
Yeah.
tried to figure out how to optimize. And he went out and looked at all of the world's top performers. And the one consistent thing that he noticed is they all had coaches.
Hmm.
And he was very curious about what's happening with coaching, because like Novak Djokovic doesn't need to be told how to play tennis. Like his coach is not as good as him as in tennis.
Mm-hmm.
But what are they doing? But they're reflecting back and observing. And I think at any stage of the game, somebody can reflect back at you and observe your habits in a way that people are not good at
Yeah.
figuring out what it is that they're doing, where their success comes from.
Mm.
Um, and this is all across the board. It's not just in their job. Like I'm currently fascinated with um, how complex my life has become now that my wife and I have a kid.
Mm.
And it's like being a manager for the first time after being an individual contributor. And we have a marriage counselor because of course we do.
Mm.
Like this is the most complex undertaking of any kind of relationship, right?
Yeah.
And why would I not want someone to reflect back at me all my communication quirks and limitations and all of this sort of stuff? I believe we are in a we're I don't know if we're top quartile, but we're getting there in terms of our communication skills and all of that,
Mm.
with the help of someone who can reflect back at me. I'll tell you a quick story, and I know you got to wrangle me around this, but
No, this is
when I
great.
finished the book, the first thing I did is I emailed the final copy to my wife, and it took a few days went by, maybe a week, and I didn't hear anything. And I said, "What do you think? Any feedback?" And she said, "No, I didn't start reading it yet." And I was really upset. And she goes, "No, of course I'm going to read it. But, it obviously doesn't come out until April. I got some time." And I was like so upset. And I said, "I've been working on this thing for 6, 8, 9 months, whatever it was. And you're the person in the world that I most want feedback from." And
Mm.
we had this discussion with our therapist. And she said, why didn't you just tell her you wanted her feedback right away? Why
Mm,
was it important for her to assume that? And I said, well, it's clearly obvious to anybody. Like, why would you not? Like, and I so dug in that I was right.
mm,
And then the therapist said to me, is there anything that your wife expects you to know that you wish that she would just tell you? And I was like, yeah, how much time do you have? Right. And I just having that reflected back in me, oh, I am clearly doing to her the thing that
mm,
she does to
yeah.
me or vice versa, right? This is literally the mirror thing. And it totally changed I'm not saying total, I still feel like I'm right, but it still changed my perspective on it. And it is so that's what I'm doing when I am coaching. I am just like,
Mm,
you told me your goal was X, and let me just reflect back at you what I see. Being a mirror is, I think, most of what I am doing. And that
yeah.
occasionally I drop in I still have strong opinions. I'm not a totally objective coach because I know the people, I know the ecosystem, but I try to be a mirror for the person's own goals, and I try and help them be accountable in that way.
Yeah. It's a fine line. Ed Schein has this book called Humble Inquiry, where he talks about this tension between asking and telling. Because in a way, we're all, nobody likes to be told what to do, generally speaking. We like to be asked. And yet sometimes I think within all of us is somebody who just wants to be told the right answer. Like there's got to be a secret. I'm messed up and I'm confused and I don't know what to do. Can somebody just give me the handbook? Like, can I just read Charlie's book? Can I grind it up in a smoothie and drink it and make it part of my body and just do the right thing?
I would not
But
recommend doing that.
that is not how that works, everyone. We should put a warning on it. Warning: do not eat. Um, but there's this temptation to give somebody the answer because you have answers, but those answers are from the past. Whereas a lot of these people are certainly with founders are going someplace where there is no road, and they kind of need to find their own path. And it's I think it's a delicate, at least that's my coaching approach. And it sounds like you're trying to walk that line too between being a mirror and knowing that everyone benefits from hearing what they said and saying, is that right? And they go, no. And, or saying, well, I meant to do that and then I didn't. So that's reflection about like intentions and the gap between intentions and reality. I think everyone does benefit from that. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective on that. And I really appreciate you reflecting on this story about communication and intentionality, because one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was co-founder relationships. I've been doing a lot of research. I've been interviewing co-founders on my podcast for a while now, because I think you say this in your book. It's a multiplier if you're aligned and a time bomb if you're not, which I think is like the quote of the year or the understatement of the year, a little bit of both. And so I want to talk about multipliers because I've definitely, there's literally a Reddit thread where people are like, no fucking way, go your own, hire everyone you need, like don't dilute, use AI. And other people are like, yeah, but there's no that price you can put on someone caring as much as you do about this thing. And you can't pay someone to bring all of that juice at the
Right.
early stage. So like in your practice, how have you found it to be a multiplier to have a co-founder?
So there's lots of things that need to get done in a startup. One of the most important things is that you need to survive it emotionally. And if you don't do that, it's going to be really hard to execute in a sales meeting and,
Mm-hmm.
all of that. And having a partner in this is incredibly helpful from an emotional perspective, right? Somebody who is as on board and as bought in as you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that, because the other thing is I think like you obviously need to build a team.
Mm.
Even in the age of AI, I think it is helpful to build a team. But that does not mean that anybody on the team has to be your co-founder.
Mm.
So that's often is sort of a tricky, like, do I need a technical co-founder? Like there are many instances where I'm like, well, you may need somebody technical on the team, Do you want to make them your co-founder? Are they appropriate for a co-founder? Is actually a different question. That's a
Mm,
different animal, right? And that's someone that you really need to be on the same page about emotionally, values wise, somebody who has a sense of ownership around the company
yeah.
and all of that kind of stuff. And so having that is really incredibly important. The other thing is somebody who also feels like they're an owner is willing to push back,
Mm,
right? Because a really good co-founder doesn't think they're right. The really good founder doesn't think they're right all the time, and oftentimes they're only right 6 out of 10 times, or just marginally right.
mm.
Um, and I think it is really hard when you are a paid employee to tell the CEO this is not the right path here, but your co-founder can do that.
Yeah. This seems like when we're talking about why having a team or a co-founder, even in the age of AI, even in the age of AI, when you can hire a million agents and where you can do so much on your own, having a person who cares as much as you do about the vision and the product, who's actually willing to call you out on your bullshit unprompted, because you have to tell the agents, criticize me. And they won't let you close the laptop and walk away if you don't agree with them. That seems like the real advantage in even in the age of AI, as a person who cares and who will disagree with you when you're
Specifically
wrong.
in the age of AI, right? Because I think Claude's not as bad as ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is constantly telling me how insightful I am and how smart and
Accurately, of course.
yeah, and no matter how many times I sort of prompt it to be like, just I don't want that, right? It's not
Mm,
helpful. Um, it is people can do that, and by the way, most people who aren't as economically incentivized as a co-founder probably won't do it because they feel like supporting you as a founder is keeping your confidence up, is giving you a pat on
mm,
the back and saying this is exciting, this is great, all of this sort of stuff. And nobody
mm.
likes feeling like a jerk. And your co-founder, we're well past that.
Yeah.
We've both been jerks to each other at different stages of this company, and you're there's a certain sense of honesty that is a requirement of a co-founder that is really integral to the relationship.
Mm. That's beautifully said. One of the things I think is interesting, a while ago, I had a friend of mine who works with Startup Reno on the podcast. And he said that if he sees co-founders who are a 50-50 split, that means that they haven't had the hard conversation. On the flip side, I've seen how when somebody is much smaller percentage, there's this there can be this resentment that builds. And so it's clear that we have to lean into the conversation about who is gets what, how much. Uh, if it's equal, it's not accurate, because usually someone started first, it was their idea, or somebody's done more. Like, it's never equal. But it's clear that we have to have that difficult conversation. If you were to write a list of the questions, if you, I mean, you're not Claude, but it's like, write me a conversation guide to help prevent a disastrous co-founder divorce through a long-term buildup of resentment from unresolved issues, because that's the time bomb I think that you're talking about.
So I think one of the things that you hear a lot in the startup ecosystem is that like financial plans are BS, right? And putting together startup financials is sort of an exercise in fiction or science fiction or fantasy. And I actually think they're a really good anchor for conversation.
Hmm.
Like, this is where we are leading the company. This is the plan. This is, you know, the power of the purse in this company is where we are going to be spreading our resources. This is what we expect. These are our goals. These are the people that we're going to hire, all of this sort of stuff. A serious board like meeting I think forces everybody to really be on the same page, right? So if one co-founder believes that you should be more of a consumer product and has a consumer background, and the other co-founder is like all in on the enterprise sales or what have you,
Hmm.
well, the answer is in the plan, actually.
Hmm.
Does it have us hiring 10 AEs, or does it have us spending a ton of money on Instagram and Facebook, and Facebook, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so making sure that everybody like signs off on a plan in the early stages to many people feels like overkill.
Hmm.
I when I used to write term sheets, I would include I want to be a board observer. And people are like, we don't have a board. It's like, actually, you do. You're on the board and your co-founder's on the board.
Hmm.
I want to have a meeting where we treat this like an adult company, where, we talk about what we're going to do next month and what we did last month and did it work, did it not work? And we have a
Hmm.
serious conversation. Matt Blumberg, who was the CEO of Return Path for a long time, like when at the beginning of the company, he wrote an HR handbook. Okay, this is literally within the first couple of months of the company existing. And in the
Yeah.
handbook, he put in that anybody who's at the company 7 years can take a 6-month sabbatical and return to their jobs. Which, like, on one hand, is a crazy thing to do. You would think, like, what a waste of time for a 2-month-old company. Matt
Yeah.
was the first person at the company to take a sabbatical after 7 years. And I think
He'd been
there's a
waiting.
right, right, 7 years. He literally wrote it, right? I think there is a non-zero correlation between companies that take future planning that seriously and companies that have a future,
Mm.
actually. That you spend that much time sort of, planning the operations of the company, that it isn't just this
Hmm.
complete startup shit show, that actually execute on it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that like having a source of truth where your employees can sort of point to like, this is the plan, this is the budget, this is the thing, that it that's what eliminates the harboring resentment, the uncertainty, the like, I don't know where this plan is going. And I've even seen it in later stage companies that sometimes, like, I had a company was forced into a level of uncertainty because they ran into some financial issues, and at the same time, their VCs, for just outside esoteric reasons, were nickel and diming them on funding the company. They're like, well, we'll give you this, and that'll bridge us for 3 months, and then we'll do this other thing. And the company never got certainty over their
Mm.
future, and morale just fell off the table. Like the marketing person couldn't budget. Like things went south in that company because there was no plan. And I come back to like, what is our plan? Give me the piece of paper that somebody can point to and argue with. Because if it's just how I feel versus what you feel, like that's kind of a recipe for co-founder disaster.
Yeah, it sounds like you're talking about disciplined product thinking, because we can look at those two hypotheses, define them as hypotheses, define the riskiest assumption, and then figure out how to test the riskiest assumption. And I really loved your how to run an efficient, thoughtful meeting, a 7-point plan, have a hypothesis that you can state, what we did to test them, what were the inputs and efforts were, what the outcomes were, what did we actually learn? Do we know? What are we going to do about what we learn differently? And like open questions. Like I could understand why you'd want to be at that meeting, because then there's a real conversation that's talking about conversation design. That is actually turning this morass, this question of like, oh, what are we? Where's this going? Like hustle, 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 to a series of disciplined, thoughtful conversations that anybody could participate in and potentially offer support, advice, help, reflection, and coaching, because it's clear what's going on. Versus like, whoa, wait, what are we talking about here, guys? Like, are we having this fight again?
And by the way, a mistake that people who are trying to break into startups often make is they think that to go from being a corporate employee to a startup employee, they have to be flexible. That the rigidness that they experienced in their, corporate life, and you approach a
Mm,
startup and you say, well, what do you do? And it's like, well, anything you need, and they sort of imagine that that's what a startup is looking for. A startup is looking to tame the chaos. They don't like the chaos, right? They want somebody who comes in and says, I do a very specific thing that you need. Like, you have been selling by the seat of your pants as a founder led sales, and I am going to figure out what the hell you've been saying to customers, put it into a messaging strategy that can be taught to AEs and BDRs and a VP of sales, and then I will go hire that person, and I will take you the hell out of the sales process so that we can actually scale this thing.
mm,
And that is what I do. And if you don't want the one thing that I do, then like go move on to somebody else. And like those people are enormously helpful to, for example, technical founders who have no idea how to build a sales team and
mm,
feel like somebody who came in with that structure is like a lifeline. Oh, thank
mm.
God. Because you will turn this thing that I've been doing with a Google sheet and God knows what my 8 versions of the PowerPoint say, um, and bring some order to this chaos so I can feel like I work at a normal company and have a normal job one day, because that would be what success feels like.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I know our time is growing nigh. I have a couple more things I want to hit on, and one of them was you mentioned one of my favorite books, which is Finite and Infinite Games. I read that probably when I was a late teenager, and I feel like there's two types of people: people who've read Finite Games and people who haven't. I'm curious how it came into your world and how it affected you broadly. I don't know where it exists in your pantheon of books, Charlie. Like,
So
here's the book that I think everyone should, the two books that Charlie wishes everyone would read. That's definitely one
so,
of mine.
so quite late actually, and it's because I sort of got reconnected with someone who founder Nama Moran, who built a company called Cheetah, and I have like a steel trap memory for pitches and LinkedIn profiles, basically. Like
Mm,
once I'm terrible with names, um, but once I sort of figure out, somebody will come up to me and they'll be like, because I've met a lot of people over the last 20 years. Hey, I pitched you this thing, and I'm like drawing a total blank, right? And they'll start to go into what the company was, and immediately I'm like, oh right, you're the guy who used to work at the magazine company, and then that thing, and then you did
mm,
this other thing, and blah blah blah. Blah. I know exactly who you are, and I could literally see your LinkedIn avatar, and there's like a forest in the background or whatever shit's going on, right?
wow.
And they're like blown away. And I just maybe I'm spending way too much time in LinkedIn. But like Nama came in to pitch us a company when I was at Union Square Ventures. And she is no longer at Cheetah, had a hell of a roller coaster ride around it and kind of burned out of it. And she posted about founder burnout and an effort that she was putting together. And
Mm,
I reached out to her and I was like, I'd love to talk to you about this because I have been thinking a lot about work life balance and I'm not a full time VC anymore. I have a 4.5 year old. The half is really important. And, you know, I just think like we should chat. And we had a series of really absolutely wonderful conversations. She's like truly a terrific and thoughtful and insightful person. And she considers herself kind of a gamer. And for her, one of the things about a startup is you're sort of constantly writing the story
mm,
and it's not just about like winning and done, but opening up new worlds and unlocking new things and growth and this very abundance mindset of being
mm,
a founder. And so I'd heard of the book, but I hadn't read it. And so I wound up picking it up. And there's just so much in there about people's approach to entrepreneurship and even approach to small problems, right? Like
Mm.
so many people want to know, should I do this thing or should I do this other thing? And the answer is actually like invent a third way, or create something new that doesn't lock you into just this binary outcome.
Mm.
And so I think it is really useful to have sort of an abundance approach philosophy to this, particularly in like, you think about venture, where people think of this false binary choice between, should I bootstrap this and run a cash flow lifestyle small business, or should I swing for the fences and bet everything on this and take all the investment money in the world? It doesn't have to be like that, right? It could be creatively financed and seed strapped, if you will, and run for um, initial, like, yes, I need money to help me get to product market fit, and once I do that, I have some element of control, and I'm going to go for a cash flow, and maybe I'll buy my investors off the cap table with a really nice return and continue to run it for a long time. Like, there's all sorts of options that you don't have to get locked into, and you can continue to play. I mean, I'm reminded of Anthony Casalena, who's the founder of Squarespace, bootstrapped Squarespace with a very small loan from his dad early on. I think he told me it was like 20 grand or 30 grand. It was like literally paid for him to just survive for like 6 months while he coded the thing. And he was like, he had no employees for like the first 6 years of Squarespace as a company before it started to grow and he started to build and started to hire. So Squarespace lived a bootstrap lifestyle business life until it really took off. And then he got an acquisition offer. And he said, it was never about the money until somebody put a figure down that I owned 95% of. And all of a sudden, that was a very distracting number.
Mm.
And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then I went out and I engineered a round in which I was able to take some money off the table. And he raised, like, out of nowhere, people didn't realize how big the company had gotten, like a $38 million round.
Mm.
I don't know how much. I'm going to guess maybe he took half or 40% off the table. And he said, I immediately bought an apartment closer to the office, put the rest of the money in the bank, and never thought about it again, and went back to work because I had lots of things that I wanted to do at the company. And ultimately they became, an IPO.
Yeah.
And it was just a really great approach to, like, I don't need to do it the way that everyone else suggested. I'm going to do it at my own terms
Yeah.
and at an appropriate stage and do what I do successfully. And I think it's a great approach.
Yeah. That's really treating it like an infinite game. Like there's no winning or losing. There's continuing to play. And
Right.
I think, it makes me think about a founder who I was coaching who was, had been really driving on their company for a long time and felt like they just weren't going to get to the IPO stage. They were tired. And that IPO, they had held that as the finite game. Like, if they don't get there, then they're really not going to be successful, and their dad's not going to really be proud of them. And this some child of immigrants makes good. And they got to the point where they were like, you know what, an acqui-hire is fine. I want to incubate my next 3 ideas. I have 2 young kids. I would like to just start investing in my relationship with my wife and pivot. And which brings me to my, I hope we still have time for my last question, because you were, this essay that you wrote, that I was just on your newsletter. I didn't even know you were working on a book, where you wrote this essay about what's next after losing somebody's money. I think this is such an interesting infinite game view of this world of venture capital, viewed not as a finite game of like, I got money and I raised and I built and I IPO'd. It's like, well, actually, the more likely thing that's going to happen is it doesn't. And so how do I design that conversation? Do I disappear? Do I ghost? Do I go hat in hand and say, oh, I'm sorry, I blew it? Your essay I thought was very good. You know, you have kind of a script to say, listen, this is, I'm going to own this. Here's my critique. I wonder what your thoughts are. And, you know, here's maybe what I might be working on next. Like, how do you think about coaching a founder to enter into that conversation with the infinite game mindset?
So one of the things I really like about being nobody calls it a blogger anymore, a newsletter writer. You know, this is the thing when you've been writing in this format for like 22 years. I used to be a blogger. I don't know what it is now. And it's that I can have these real-time conversations. And that essay literally started the moment after I got off the phone with one of the founders that I had backed, whose company had failed.
Hmm.
And the reason why I was on the phone with them is because somebody asked me for a reference because he's starting something new. And I was put in this very awkward spot because
Hmm.
I didn't know he was starting something new. And what am I supposed to? I don't know anything about that. What kind of a signal is that? Oh, I guess they're on bad terms now because they're not even talking about,
Hmm.
what the next thing is. And I said to him, I was like, I don't think that's what you want me to say. I have no idea what he's working on, or the implied, like, maybe I don't care what he's working on. I'm not interested because he's proven to be such a failure. I said, this is going to signal for all sorts of things. And he
Hmm.
kind of admitted to, like, I feel like I couldn't pitch you on it because of the fact that he had lost the first time around. Um, and I told him, I said, well, listen, and I really love, and a couple of them are in the book, the sort of four quadrant, one of two things can be true, and then the other two things and the variable can be true, and it makes this sort of a four-box thing. Either I think you're a loser or I don't. And you either come and talk to me about it or you don't. Right? And
Hmm.
you sort of explore the four boxes. Like, maybe I think you are, but if you come and talk to me and you own it, my reference might be, that was really a shit show, but I think he's learned a lot. And I feel like,
Hmm.
earnestly trying to, not repeat the same mistakes. And, I really appreciate him. And I would certainly think more of him for, approaching me along those lines.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe it doesn't change anything about the way that I think about it. Well, then there's nothing lost there, right? You're not going to make me feel
Hmm.
worse by coming to me and saying I learned something, right? But if you don't, then I'm liable to say anything, right? I'd never back that guy. What a jerk, whatever. But the reality is, I think he worked his ass off at a company. I think there were some things that were hard. I think there's some things he could probably do better. He should want to know what those things that I probably thought he
Hmm.
could better at,
Yeah.
right? And so to get that feedback, I think is really important. And that's one of the reasons why I've always tried to be really transparent with my investors, even in the fund. You know, um, I had somebody come to me and say, "You seem pretty even keeled. Like, how are you doing this? You're managing all this people's money." I said, "Well, first of all, I acknowledge the fact that, like, maybe I'm not good at this. I try, I work really hard at it. I
Hmm.
I ask for help. But I'm not going to tie up my identity with I am a good VC and that's what kind of a person I am. Because if it turns out that I'm a bottom quartile performer in all of my funds, then who am I as a person? Like what a terrible outcome that would be.
Hmm.
But there are people who definitely feel that way,
Sure.
and it's undoubtedly depressing. And so I tell myself that I am trying hard and that there are certain things in my control that I should do better. That's one of the reasons why I like being a coach is it gives me a positive outlet to deal with all the mistakes I made. I could go back and be like, dude, I have a really great idea for a mistake that you shouldn't make. And then somebody be like, that's awesome. I won't make that one. As opposed to me
Hmm.
just being like, what mistake I made? Oh, what an idiot. There's nothing positive there. But now I can turn all my mistakes into positive advice for other people.
I mean, that's what that essay is somebody who really did not give you the opportunity to be prepared for the reference. I also appreciate the sort of the game design approach of, look, it's one of these four things, and if they think you're an idiot and they don't want to talk to you, that's just the one of the four things that you can't do anything about. That's not in your control. But most of the options involve you talking to them and moving the needle somehow on their perspective. And also, as you say, getting that opportunity to get more information back from them.
Right.
I do have, I drew this funnel that you talked about on Tuesday. Like, I'm going to see 2,000 companies a year. I'm going to talk to 150 of them. I'm going to research 20 of them, and I'm going to fund 10 of them, like, which are very hard numbers. And you talked about how the founders have this sort of positive mindset, and they need to have this, I'm going to J curve this thing, and I'm one in a million. This is a one in a million ideas. On the fear and greed scale, there's so much, you should be terrified for not taking advantage of this opportunity, and there's so much money here, you got to get involved. I think it's challenging to maintain optimism when you know that most of the companies you're looking at are going to fail. And I'm wondering, because you do seem like you present as somebody who is, I mean, self-reflective, but not morose. You don't strike me as an Eeyore. How do you maintain your sense of optimism and enthusiasm for all these pitches you've seen, knowing that, you're in the infinite game, but most of them are somehow going to lose? Was this something you learned at your parents' knees? This, like, is there a book you read, like, or is it just how you're built?
The first question I need to ask myself is, would I consider myself optimistic? And I don't know if being optimistic is being anti-pessimistic. I'd have to think about that because I'm not 100% sure that always they're always opposites. And I say that because I'm like, I always push people to think, is it possible that you could win?
Mm.
Right? Is it optimistic? Because I know they're a long shot, but I focus on what's possible.
Mm.
Right? And so I know going in that for every 30 companies I invest in, my hope is that 3 of them drive most of the returns. I mean, I hope they all drive most of the returns, right? But the math works if 3 of them are driving most of the returns. The thing I do know is every single company that I've ever invested in had a possible path to blowout success. There's not a single company that I invested in, and I couldn't tell you these are the ingredients for this team, this idea to win, right? So it was always possible. I think I always am realistic about the chances and how hard it was. So I think I mentally prepare myself for what could happen beforehand, and that makes it easier. And I think that, I mean, in some case, that does come from family, but maybe in a sort of a difficult way. It's like I've experienced a lot of dealing with family health issues. My mom was sick for quite a long time. My dad went through a CNS lymphoma and went from like being totally fine to being gone in like 6 crazy weeks. And in each of those moments, I felt like I had to step up as a, sort of take on burden as being like local son and tag team this with my siblings. And the way I would sort of approach it or even deal with it is to be really realistic about, oh, here's what we might be facing here. Like, just let me think through all of the possibilities. I don't want to be surprised by anything. And then once I've like acknowledged the worst thing that can happen, being like, okay, I've mentally prepared myself for all of the bad things that could possibly happen. Nothing's going to be surprising here. Now let me just go forward in the best way that I can possibly do that. And most often the worst thing that can happen is not the worst thing that actually happens. So you're like, oh, that's not as bad as it could have been.
Right. Yeah. If we're doing the 4 box, it's like best case, worst case, best case, worst case. Like the odds of the worst case and the best case, you've gamed it out and you're prepared for the others, and say like, look, I'm prepared. I'm prepared. So you're a
Yep.
prepperist, it
Yep.
sounds like.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a prepper. I think, yeah, I probably am a bit of a prepper in that case.
I would
More
call you
so
a
than
prepperist. It's a little classier than a
that comes with its own
yeah.
sort of,
Yeah. Tinge, let's
yeah,
say.
yeah.
So listen, I think we're definitely in time. I appreciate you making this time, Charlie. Is there anything I haven't asked you that I should ask you besides what I'm going to ask you afterwards, which is where can people find more about your work? And, we'll put the links to all your things in the show notes, but like, what aren't people, you're doing a lot of these. So what
Yeah.
have I not asked you, and what haven't been people asking you that you think people should be asking you? What's the unasked question?
You know what I really appreciate is that every conversation I've had about this has been slightly different and comes at it from a different perspective. And I think part of the reason for that is that the book is written for the 99% of people who are going to struggle to fundraise, or for whom fundraise is not just a slam dunk, right? Who didn't just
Yeah.
sell a company for $500 million and now clearly everyone who backed them before is going to come back again, right?
Right.
That is most people. The ways in which you could approach that process are infinite, right? It is how do you have the emotional fortitude for it? How do you build a team? Like there are so many different podcasts and conversations that I could have around this, right? Um, talking about venture, right? Like I talked to a law class, and while it was an entrepreneurial law class, it was very clear that this was a place where there was a lot of interest in public interest in small business entrepreneurship and all of this sort of stuff. And we talked about a whole variety of factors that go into this. So every conversation is unique, and having a discussion that focuses on what kind of difficult conversations that people have and what is underlying, about partnership and all this sort of stuff is great, and it's interesting and it's complex. So, yeah, you have asked different questions than just about any other person has asked, and that's what makes this um, uh, fun. It's also is one of the hard things about writing a book is that book by definition is incomplete,
Yes.
right? And I've gotten some feedback around some of the things I've been writing about lately of like, oh, well, you talk about what you know underrepresented founders go through, and you talk about it from the founder side, and that's really incomplete because it's really all, yeah, yeah, it is, because a
Yeah.
completely exhaustive conversation is impossible, right? So
And it
yeah,
would be
it's really
exhausting, honestly.
frustrating. Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. So no, I appreciate the line of questions, and there's nothing glaring that is uh, left out.
Excellent. Well, that makes
But
me
if I
feel
think of it,
good.
we could always come back and do
We
this.
can always come back. We can do a part two. Well, speaking of part two, is there another book that you feel like you're like, okay, now I know the book that I want to write next? Is there something like itching in the back of your head? Because clearly you are writing doesn't seem, maybe there are hard parts of the book for you to write, but it seems like writing is something that's really a muscle
I
for you
like
that's well
writing.
trained. Yeah.
I I really do like writing, and I don't love book writing. and I don't love book writing because of the sort of finality of it, the point in which like it is done and you can't add to it. And I know there's like additions and updates, but it feels like monolithic on-premise software, versus
Sure.
Claude comes out with a new feature every day and it's amazing, right? And
Yeah.
I love being able to have a conversation and immediately turn it into a blog post / newsletter, and
Mm-hmm.
to go back and say I wrote this thing and actually I was wrong about it, or whatever. The fact that this book, you know, I closed the book on it literally 5 or 6 months ago, and it just feels like I'm so paranoid that feels totally inadequate in the face of the progress that AI has made. And I feel like I need to create an addendum that is like how to manage your fundraise with AI and all of that sort of stuff. And there's plenty of YouTube videos about all of that sort of stuff. So it's fine that it's not complete in that way. But the two topics I'm most interested in going forward is I am really fascinated with how parenting changes relationships
Mm,
and its impact on that. And a lot of my coaching clients, a few of them are having their first kids or getting pregnant or whatever, and oh, you're such a dad. You constantly, talking about your daughter. Tell me parenting tips. I was like, I don't have any parenting tips, but the thing I do tell people is there are 8.5 billion people on the face of the earth. The parenting thing is relatively straightforward. It's hard, but like you'll figure it out, like because people have figured it out. How it changes your relationship is no one really talks about, and how all of a sudden
yeah.
you picked this person to be the most important person in the world, and now you are neither's most important person in the world is really difficult. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating. And then the other is, if I wasn't a VC and if I wasn't an investor, the other thing I could have done in life, although I'd be severely underpaid for it, is to run a career planning office in a university.
Mm,
And I find that job really fascinating. And I think it is no more challenging than it is today, where you have graduates joining a market where entry level jobs are getting obliterated by AI. There's
yeah.
no company loyalty. And yet the world is their oyster. And I would just tear all of that shit out and completely redesign
Mm.
how we teach kids to be entrepreneurial and all of that sort of stuff. So um, that's probably what I would write about, and that was what my first book was about. But no one's ever seen that book because I wrote a book a couple of years after I graduated, and I shopped it around to publishers, and nobody cared who I was, and it was called Start Strong, Graduate Great, and it was all about how to find a job you like in college and actually get into it. And at some point, I'll write a modern version of that probably.
Or just put it into a resource augmented file and just make a chatbot for the kids to talk to. Honestly, Charlie, that it's very humbling because it's a strange time to be alive always, but it's a real challenge. And I think your stochastic, probabilistic based, like prepperist view of the world while balancing a like an optimistic visionary view of the world is something that it sounds like your kid's lucky to have a dad who thinks that way.
I
They
think
won't
she,
always they won't always think that, but
I think she's just happy I like ice cream as much as she does. That's where her mind's.
well, listen, I'm really grateful for the conversation. This is great stuff. Where should people go? Obviously, they should read First Buy, Founder Unfriendly. Follow you on.
I'm on Squarespace. So I have been at thisisgoingtobebig.com forever. That is my website. There is a link to the book there. Obviously, it's on Amazon. It's on bookshop.org, where you can go buy from your independent local bookstore. And it is a very findable title. That's probably it's the first title we even considered, and as soon as it popped into my head, everybody really liked it and thought it was fitting for my personality. Buyers of the book, not that it's very expensive, but if you really want to get high ROI from it, can email their receipt to founderunfriendly at next.nyc,
Hmm.
and we will invite them to a series of 8 conversations that we are having with co-founder of Datadog, co-founder of Zero Hash and Movable Ink and Backupify and uh, the Wing and just like all these really terrific founders that have seen the ups and downs of being
Hmm.
entrepreneurs. We're going to do those conversations in May and June.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really going to be a fun set of conversations with people I've worked with, and share it and give it to, if you feel like you're an expert and you feel like you're in that 1% who didn't have trouble fundraising, like, someone who needs this if they are thinking about being entrepreneurial, and even if it means opening a coffee shop you still might have to ask for money for someone. And my hope is that it is still useful to that person as well. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah. I think it is useful for all those people. Well, okay. That's all great stuff. I think you've been more than generous with your time. And so I will call scene.
There you go.